The Ice Entity, an original story by Florence Heffernan, read by me, Patrick Walsh.
Prologue, 5,000 years ago, the Arctic Circle. The young female fox held its pose, motionless except for the slightest quivering of her ears as she pinpointed the exact location of the small mammal beneath the snow. Her white coat made her almost invisible, but not completely. On a ridge 200 yards away, a young woman had binoculars set to infrared, trained on her. Stealthily, the young woman, named Kyla, reached behind her and pulled an arrow out of the quiver slung across her back. She held her breath, holding herself steady. Now! She let go the arrow and watched it rifle through the air. Yes! The fox was down. In no time she had it strapped to the sled and was setting off for home. The sled hummed across the snow, faster than was strictly sensible, but Kyla was exhilarated. She coasted the dunes effortlessly. She was very pleased with herself. The snowy white pelt would look very good on her wall. The small entry wound from the arrow would not detract from it at all, unlike the ragged scorched hole that a laser would have made. She wasn't a fool. She had the laser with her, but when she hunted, she used the bow. No one in Tantalus had needed to hunt for food for many generations, but many, like her friends, enjoyed the sport. There was just enough of a chance of countering something more dangerous than a fox to get the adrenaline flowing, but in truth, with the power of their weapons and the speed of their craft, the risks were minimal. Their most dangerous foes were the primitive humans that lived on the tundra, but they rarely adventured this far north. It was a beautiful evening. It wouldn't get completely dark at this time of year, but the light had faded enough that the lights of Tantalus were beginning to stand out against the sky. The power dome shone a cold fluorescent blue. The biodome was like a mini rainforest with its green canopy glinting through the sol glass, and the habitation dome shone with a warm golden light. Kyla paused at the top of a dune about a mile away to admire the view. It never occurred to her that she was lucky to live there. She deserved it. Her gilded existence was enabled by technology bestowed upon her ancestors by the gods to reward them for their superior intelligence and their virtue. Kyla and her fellow citizens saw no reason to share it. As she watched, an ominous white cloud appeared in the distance, behind the domes. She should get a move on. It was strange. She was sure that there hadn't been any forecast of a storm. As she watched, it travelled with astonishing speed across the ice until it reached the citadel. She could see now that it was a blizzard, whipping up more and more ice and snow as it went. Before she had travelled 100 metres, it had engulfed Tantalus and was swirling around it like a wall of snow. She stopped, unsure what to do. The storm had centred itself over Tantalus and it wasn't budging. Perhaps she should wait it out. But for how long? She had no idea how long it would take for a storm of this magnitude to wear itself out. She was just deciding that she should take a risk and strike out for home when she heard it, an unearthly screech unlike anything she'd ever heard before. She caught her breath. What in God's name was that? Almost immediately afterwards, there was an ear-splitting crack, and to her horror, she saw a black spiderweb of crevasses appearing on the ice. They splintered and cracked in what seemed incredibly to be with purpose until the citadel was almost surrounded. She didn't understand what she was seeing. The people inside the domes, her family and her friends, would have no idea what was happening outside. Then she thought she saw something else, something white moving up out of the cracks. She put the binoculars up to her eyes. Yes, there was definitely something there, but she couldn't make it out. She switched to infrared, and it disappeared. Back to visible light. There it was again, a gigantic, amorphous shape looming over the citadel, indistinct in the blizzard, but definitely there. She switched to infrared again. It disappeared again. What the hell? She dropped the binoculars to her side and watched helplessly as the entity, whatever it was, hovered over her home. She felt rather than heard crackling and splintering, and she saw the domes begin to shatter. The web of crevasses in the ice came together to surround the citadel, and it fell, crumbling into the maelstrom that the ocean had become. Kyla was stunned with fear. She fell to the ground, and everything went black. It was hours later when she came round. She considered closing her eyes again and letting the cold take her, but she couldn't. She was the last of her race. Her memories were all that was left of them now. So she mounted her sled and, numb with grief, headed south. If the human settlement on the tundra was still there, she would throw herself upon their mercy. God knows they had no reason to help her. But perhaps she had something to trade. She had her sled, and she had her laser, and she had a story to tell. Maybe that would be enough. Chapter 1. Svalbard Airport. It was a gusty spring day at the most northerly airport in the world when Jerry was dropped off by taxi with a small bag containing his phone, his laptop, a change of clothes and some toiletries. He walked into departures and scanned for the pre-arranged meeting point outside the souvenir shop. He would be able to browse the polar bear keyrings and stuffed reindeer while he waited. There should be 4 paying guests, including himself, and 2 guides. He was surprised that the expedition was heading off this early in the year, but it seemed that if they had waited until summer, the ice would have been too thin and unstable. He hadn't realised that, unlike the South Pole, the North Pole was not on land. It sat atop a shifting mass of ice on the Arctic Ocean. Luckily, the ocean could retain more summer heat than land could, so although it would be down to minus 40 degrees at worst, it was still going to be a lot warmer than the Antarctic. It was a small airport and not busy, so he spotted the tanned and bearded man on the far side of the concourse immediately. Recognising him from the Arctic Adventure website, he strode confidently up to him with his hand outstretched. "Ah, you must be Jerry Wilson. I'm John Savage. Good to meet you in person. Give me a moment and I'll introduce you to the rest of the team. Have a seat." He directed Jerry to a row of chairs near the window. The other 3 guests were already there. There was a woman who looked to be in her 50s, slim, with a blonde pixie cut, wearing designer jeans and jacket. Jerry recognised the logos. His wife favoured the same brands. There was a young man, probably in his early 20s, handsome in an understated way, dressed in typical student attire, jeans and sloppy jumper. The last guest was hard to pin down, age-wise. Perhaps late 30s, but maybe older. He was wearing a dark blue, slightly ill-fitting jacket, a baseball cap and a t-shirt with OCP blazoned across it. The logo on the t-shirt looked familiar, but Jerry couldn't immediately place it. He looked a little awkward and scruffy, but looks could be deceiving. He must have made a ton of money somehow. Jerry nodded a greeting to his fellow passengers as he lowered himself onto a hard plastic chair. After a few minutes rifling through a wad of papers, Peter cleared his throat. "Welcome to the adventure of a lifetime," he began. "You have been carefully selected to join us on this challenging voyage of discovery because we believe that you have what it takes. From now on, you are not paying guests, you are part of the team, and believe me, you will need to be if we are to succeed." Jerry looked at the other 3 paying guests and wondered if they had all been through the same less than rigorous selection procedure. Sure, he had needed a letter from his doctor confirming that he was fit enough, and he had filled in a psychological evaluation which consisted of a multiple-choice questionnaire that truthfully came down to his own assessment that he would remain calm under pressure and was a good team player. "Follow me," Peter continued as he led them through the airport to the VIP terminal. The other expedition guide was already there. "Hi, Peter Haynes. Good to meet you." He could have been Peter's twin. Both men were toned, tanned and bearded, in matching cargo trousers and khaki sweaters. There was a definite whiff of the ex-military about them. "Everything we need has already been dropped off and set up at the camp, and the helicopter is on its way back to us as we speak. I'll need you to change into these." he said as he handed out bulky orange survival suits, mittens and balaclavas. He rattled a set of keys. "These are for your lockers. Stow away your civvies and your mobile phones and laptops, etc. You won't be able to use them on the ice anyway. We have a satellite phone for emergencies, but otherwise we are going to be incommunicado." One of the team, the woman, raised their hand. "I'll need to use my phone for photos and videos though. I guess that will be okay?" The others murmured in agreement. "Up to you. If you want to take some snaps, no problem." He handed out the keys. "The helicopter will be here in about 30 minutes, so use the time to suit up, message your folks, and why don't you introduce yourselves? Be back soon." Jerry felt a bit self-conscious when he exited the gents in his cold weather gear. He was more used to wearing a sharp suit or polo shirts and chinos on his days off. He joined the others who were already changed and sitting back in their chairs looking out over the tarmac. He decided to go first. Hi there. My name's Jerry Wilson. I'm 60 years old and married with 4 grown-up kids. I guess you'd say I'm a self-made man. I work in business and finance, and I'm on this trip because I decided that I wanted to do something that would be a challenge and at the same time be something worthwhile. That's what he had written on his application, anyway. Chapter 2, 6 months earlier, Surrey, England. What do you get a man who is everything for a milestone event like a 60th birthday? If you want a watch that can tell you the time all over the world and function at the bottom of the ocean, he'll get one. If he wants a sports car, name it, it's his. If he wants a piece of fancy artwork that he doesn't understand but can show off to his friends and associates, it's on his wall. Jerry Wilson had all that and more. His wife, Matilda, needed to up the ante. A man like Jerry needed his ego stroked, and if she didn't do it, well, someone else undoubtedly would. She was reading an article about space tourism one day when she had the idea. She would buy him an experience. Not a quick trip into orbit, though. Everyone who was anyone was doing that these days. She thought about booking him a place in a race across the desert. Adventurous enough, and Jerry liked his fast cars and powerful motorbikes. But what if he didn't win? She could buy his way into the race, but she didn't think she could fix it for him to win, and he didn't much like losing. A few days later, the solution fell into Matilda's lap. She could send him to the North Pole. For the first time in many years, there was going to be an expedition to Ice Camp Chronos 7, which lay at 89 degrees north. It sounded hazardous and romantic, but in fact, a British company called Arctic Exploration would supply everything and make sure that the paying guests had just the right amount of adventure. The exploration, in the title, gave the expedition gravitas, but the actual amount of science being done was very minor. Jerry might get to collect a bit of ice for analysis if he was lucky. There was of course a disclaimer, unforeseen circumstances, etc. But to be honest, you had to sign one of those to take a paddle boat out in the park these days, so Matilda had no expectation of anything untoward happening to her beloved husband. Unfortunately. If Jerry had any doubts about the upcoming adventure, he had too much pride to express them. In fact, he let it be known that it was all his idea. Sure, Matilda had arranged it for him, but as soon as he had read the article in the Telegraph, in fact he hadn't read it, he'd been raring to go. He was proud to support British science and push the boundaries of human endurance, as he told Movers and Shakers magazine. His wealthy clients couldn't help but be impressed. He foresaw plenty of good publicity, and in due course, plenty of good business. Chapter 3, Svalbard Airport. Jerry turned to the woman in the group. She coughed and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Samantha. I won't tell you my age, and it would be rude of you to ask." She laughed. "I work in publishing, and I'm on this trip because I've worked damn hard all my life, raising 2 children while simultaneously running a successful business. And now my children are grown up and I'm divorced. It was time that I did something for myself. I actually came across an article about the ice camp in one of the magazines I publish, and it just appealed to me, so here I am." Samantha turned to the young man sitting on her left. He shuffled in his seat, leant forward, and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Nathan. I've just finished a degree in environmental science at Sussex University, and this is my little adventure before I settle down to work in the family business." Jerry thought that it must be a pretty successful family business if it was paying for this young man's trip. Nathan clearly wasn't going to say any more, so all eyes turned to the bundled up figure leaning back in his chair at the end of the row. Without moving, he began to speak. "My name's Scott. I'm 45, I'm not married, and I don't have any kids. I'm an entrepreneur in the field of robotics and biotech. I have been called a tech bro." He let out a strangely high-pitched giggle. "I guess I'll answer to that. I'm very interested in this part of the world. I've done a bit of research already, and I'll be happy to share my knowledge around the campfire, so to speak. It's going to be mega." The other three guests shared uneasy glances with each other. Scott was going to be hard work. They were saved from further awkward conversation by Peter's return. "Right, everyone, John's got all the gear out on the tarmac, so as soon as the helicopter touches down, you can help us load up." Jerry was the first on his feet. Might as well show willing, he thought, and the other three tagged along behind him. An airfield worker in a high-vis vest punched a button, and the doors to the runway slid open, letting in a blast of cold air. Samantha shivered, and Jerry wondered how the hell she was going to get on at the North Pole. They pulled up their fur hoods and headed out onto the tarmac. The bright yellow helicopter landed in a swirl of wind and thrumming rotor blades. John held them back, motioning for them to wait until the blades came to a stop. Then he heaved open the door to the body of the aircraft and began stowing away their bags. Nathan and Jerry competed with one another to lift the largest bags, and to be fair to Samantha, she did her share. The same couldn't be said of Scott. He seemed to be happy to let the rest of them get on with it, despite getting dirty looks from John. There weren't many bags though, so it wasn't long before everyone was inside the helicopter, strapped in and ready to go. Peter was the last in, making sure that everything was stowed away safely before issuing each of them with headphones and mics. 1, 2, 1, 2. Peter did a roll call, not because he needed to check that everyone in his small party was present and correct, but to make sure that their headphones and mics were working. He gave a thumbs up to the pilot and strapped himself into the seat next to John. "Right, everyone, we're about to take off. Welcome to Expedition Ice Camp Chronos 7. The fun starts now. Listen up, because I'll be pointing out some stuff that will interest you on the way." For the first time, Jerry felt a flicker of excitement. No going back now. This was it. Samantha and Nathan were looking excitedly out of their windows as the helicopter lifted up into the cold blue Arctic sky. But Jerry couldn't help noticing that Scott looked a bit queasy. He really hoped that there were sick bags on board. They'd been flying over a khaki-coloured, undulating landscape for a while when Peter's voice came over the headphones. "We are now flying over northern Greenland. You might be surprised to see that there isn't any snow here. This is because it's too dry. This is technically a desert." He had their attention. "Don't worry though, there'll be plenty of snow and ice later." Samantha asked if they would see any polar bears. So far the only one they'd seen was the stuffed one in the arrivals hall at Svalbard Airport. It was Nathan who answered. "Polar bears prefer to be on the ice where they can hunt seals, but with global warming they are coming inland more often, becoming a nuisance even." "Nathan's right," said Peter, "but to be honest, if we're going to see a polar bear on this trip, it would be much better if we saw it now from the safety of the helicopter. Remember guys, the polar bear is the apex predator around here." "What should we do if we see one near the camp?" asked Samantha nervously. "Well, That was going to be the part of the safety briefing I was going to give you just before we landed. But as you've raised it, I'll tell you now. If you see a polar bear, even if you think you see a polar bear, no matter how far away it is, you tell me or John immediately. One of us will always be on duty and will always have the rifle loaded. Samantha's eyes widened and Peter gave John a wink. It didn't hurt to give the customers a little scare now and then to add to the excitement. Scott's ears had pricked up and he chipped in. Hey guys, I'm a pretty good shot myself. In fact, I belong to a rifle club, and it's not boasting to say that I'm usually top of the leaderboard, so if you need a backup... He trailed off. Good to know, said Peter, but the look he gave John said, no fucking way. They didn't see any polar bears, and the terrain beneath them was, though ecologically fascinating, quite dull visually, so the four travellers were left to their own thoughts until Peter's voice came over their headphones again. Now this is interesting. If you look out of the starboard window, you'll see some lumps and bumps on the ground. This is Peary Island, and those are the ruins of the most northerly human habitation in history. All four craned out of the window to get a good look. Artifacts over 2,000 years have been found there. It was deserted, then occupied, I think, 3 times since then, most recently 700 years ago. Nathan asked if anyone knew why it had been deserted. At this point, Scott looked as though he was about to say something, but he changed his mind and just sat silently with a smug look on his face. Peter replied, I'm not an expert, of course, but there are several theories. A change in the climate might have led to a change in hunting patterns, or a contagious disease might have wiped out what must have been a small and isolated community. And then there are the more, shall we say, lurid folk tales involving devils and monsters and the like. As I say, I'm no expert. Interesting, said Nathan. I might do a bit of research when I get back, he laughed. I think I can be ruling out devils and monsters, though. Scott muttered something under his breath which sounded a bit like, no smoke without fire. The rest of the trip passed uneventfully, with Peter giving them a few updates as they passed from Arctic desert to ocean, and then to ice. And before long, he was pointing out a speck on the horizon, which was their first sight of Ice Camp Chronos 7. He gave them the promised safety briefing, which mainly consisted of 1. Do as you're told. 2. Don't wander away from the camp. And 3. Do as you're told. From the air, the ice camp looked like a rag-bag collection of dark green bits and pieces nestled in the snow. As the helicopter descended, snow and ice whipped up into the air, and Jerry half expected the tent to be blown away. Still, this was going to be his home for the next couple of weeks. He had to trust that John and Peter knew what they were doing. Chapter 4, Ice Camp Chronos 7. Goggles on, hoods up, let's get out of here, said Peter once the rotor blades had come to a stop. They scrambled from the helicopter over the ice towards the camp, like 6 bright orange animated jelly babies, hauling the bags behind them. It was noticeably colder here than it had been at the airport, and snow flurries danced in a keen wind like so many downy feathers. Once inside the largest tent, they listened to the thrum of the helicopter blades fading as it headed back to base. After a few minutes, they couldn't hear it anymore, bringing home to them that they were alone now, at the top of the world. A string of lights along the back of the tent flickered as the generator somewhere outside spluttered into life. John threw one of the bags over to Samantha, saying, You'll be in a tent on your own, Samantha, and Peter will be in a tent with Nathan. I'll be in a tent with Jerry and Scott. Is that okay with everyone? Jerry wasn't that happy about having to share a tent with Scott, but he couldn't really find a good enough excuse to object, so he nodded. This, as you can see, John nodded towards the aluminium table and chairs, is the mess tent. It was large with a dining area in the centre and a work area towards the back. There was a laptop already set up with a satellite phone next to it and a jumble of boxes, presumably scientific equipment. We will spend all our time here as a group. The smaller tents are just for sleeping in. As I said on the helicopter, we stick together. We're giving you some privacy, Samantha, but we will be checking on you through the night, so don't be alarmed if you hear something rustling outside your tent. Tomorrow we'll start work, but for the rest of the day, we can just get ourselves settled in, melt some snow and get ourselves a hot meal. Peter handed Nathan the saucepan, asking him to go out and pack it full of clean snow, whilst John rummaged in one of the bags, digging out tea bags and vacuum-packed pouches of such delicacies as beef stroganoff and Irish stew. Dried milk only, I'm afraid, but hey, we've got biscuits, so it's not all bad. Nathan came back in, shaking snow off his boots, and handed the saucepan over to John. Good enough? John peered into the saucepan. Yep, looks clean enough to me, and with that, he plonked the saucepan onto a small electric hob. They were all happy to have the stroganoff, so with all their pouches squeezed into one large pan, it wasn't long before they were all fed and the chores were done. Night had fallen. Sadly, they weren't able to have the experience of midnight sun at this time of year. It was almost cosy in the tent, and Jerry felt surprisingly warm and relaxed, especially when John produced a bottle of whiskey. Just a little icebreaker to build up the team spirit, hey? All in? Jerry was more used to a single malt, but the supermarket brand was smooth enough. John was adamant that they wouldn't have more than a large shot of whiskey each, because he didn't want one of them succumbing to hypothermia in the night while they slept off a hangover. But after the excitement of the day, it was more than enough to relax them and loosen their tongues. Jerry was a deal maker, and he was good at it because he was good at reading people, so he was genuinely curious to find out more about his travelling companions. It might turn out to be useful. He started with Nathan. Did you say that you studied geography at Sussex University? Nathan nodded. Almost. It was environmental science. My mum paid for this trip as a reward for doing well in my finals, and to be honest, was a bit of a consolation prize as well. I didn't have a gap year because my dad wouldn't pay for it. As it happens, he couldn't see the point of university at all. He thought I should work my way up from the bottom like he did. Luckily, Mum took my side. I had to work for him, though, through every vacation, and I'll be signed up to the accountancy department as soon as I get back. I would have liked to have pursued my studies further, gone for a PhD and done some research maybe, but my father has definitely run out of patience now. I guess Mum hopes that this trip will scratch the itch and that I'll be ready to settle down into corporate life when I get back. I shouldn't complain, really. I know I'm lucky to have a lucrative career lined up for me. What is the family business? Asked Samantha. Rare earth materials, Nathan replied. Like lithium. I mean, they are essential for renewable energy, so it's not that working in the family business is against my principles exactly. He tailed off, and Samantha chipped in soothingly. It's just that it's not what inspires you. Nathan agreed. Yeah, I'm more interested in ecology than I am in technology, I guess. It was Samantha's turn to be grilled. What kind of magazines do you publish? Asked Jerry. Oh, this and that. Mainly fashion, but some lifestyle. It's paid the bills, but eventually you get tired of trying to spot the latest trend in hemlines and curtains, you know? I want to do something more meaningful with my life when I get back. Set a good example for my kids. Nathan nodded approvingly and said, I'm sure they will be proud of you. Samantha looked down into her tumbler of whiskey, and Jerry swore that he saw her blink back tears. He didn't really want to give Scott the opportunity to hold forth, so he turned to Peter and John. What about you guys? I'm guessing that you're ex-military? Peter nodded. You would be correct. Scott hadn't shown much interest in Nathan or Samantha, but his ears pricked up at the mention of the word military. So you guys must have some really cool stories, right? Well, we do indeed, Peter replied, but if we told you, we'd have to kill you. He laughed and changed the subject. So Scott, what exactly do you do? With unexpected wit, Scott replied, If I told you, I'd have to kill you. And he gave that strange, high-pitched giggle again. Seriously, it's cutting-edge stuff, and I doubt that you'd understand it. Suffice to say that when we pull it off, it will be transformational for the human race. The rest of the party didn't know what to say in response to this grandiose statement and fell silent. That's when they first heard it. It started with a sound like a rifle crack reverberating across the ice, followed by an eerie sound like a cross between a howl and a screech. They looked nervously at their guides, and Samantha spoke for them all when she said, "What the fuck was that?" John and Peter looked rattled and glanced uneasily at each other. "Might have been a wolf," suggested John. "Nobody mentioned wolves before," shouted Scott accusingly. "And what about the other noise? It sounded like a gunshot." "Calm down," said John. "It's not unusual for wolves to be this far north, but not impossible, and sometimes the ice cracks as the ocean swells beneath it. I'm almost positive that's what we heard. I'll put the drone up and have a look. I was going to anyway, before we settle down for the night. If there's a wolf pack out there, a few shots into the air will drive them off." Peter booted up the laptop, while John pulled on his snowsuit, grabbed his rifle, and went outside into the dark with his drone. No one offered to come with him. Instead, they gathered around the small screen. In the dark, they were relying on thermal imaging, and at first it was hard to make out exactly what they were looking at. But after a few seconds, it became clear that they were looking down on the camp, John appearing as a grey blob with bright white spots for his head and hands. The drone lifted higher and circled around. They looked anxiously at Peter. "Nothing. Nothing at all." He nodded at Jerry. "And let John know that he can bring the drone down." "So what the fuck was that noise?" demanded Scott. Peter replayed the drone footage a few times, and again for John when he was back in the tent. "I'm not sure," he said quietly. "I think if I had to put my money on it, I would say it was a wolf pack, but that it's a long way off and out of sight." The ice cracking must have set them off. Wolves have a keen sense of smell, all right, but I don't think that they could sense us from that far away. If they're out there, they don't know we're here, but in any case, we'll take it in turns to keep watch tonight. Thoroughly spooked, Samantha refused to go into her sleeping tent on her own, and she insisted on bunking in with Nathan and John. "For God's sakes, I don't need privacy when I'm wrapped up in so many clothes and sleeping bags that you can hardly tell I'm human, let alone a woman." John nodded. "Okay, it's fine. One less temp to keep an eye on." Peter took the first watch. As well as the drone, they had a camera set up outside the tent, so he settled himself down with a cup of coffee beside the laptop. Though the night passed without incident, none of them slept well, but all they heard was the keening of the wind as it buffeted the tent. Chapter 5. In the light of day, they all felt a bit better, and after a functional breakfast of instant oats and tin peaches, they were ready to go. John unfolded a map and placed a compass on it, while Peter packed lunches and thermos flasks of coffee. "We've marked out 4 locations that we need to hike to for samples. It's a little trek from camp, but the weather is good, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, let's go." After an hour's hike over snow dunes, they arrived at the first location on the map, Peter verifying it with the GPS on the satellite phone. The camp was now just a smudge in the distance. The wind had dropped, and the sky was an incredible perfect blue. The undulating, pristine, snowy landscape seemed to stretch out to infinity in every direction. This was wilderness such as none of them, except perhaps John and Peter, had ever experienced. Nathan was visibly overcome, prompting Samantha to give him a big hug, and even Jerry, who didn't have an artistic bone in his body, felt a sense of the sublime. Samantha was the only one who had remembered to bring her mobile phone and duly took a number of selfies and group photos. John ripped plastic containers and scoops out of their sterilised packaging and handed them out. "It's very important that you don't touch the bowl of the scoop or the inside of the container with your hands or mittens, okay?" "Yes, sir," Jerry shot back. Scott expressed his disappointment that the extent of their scientific endeavours was dumping a bit of snow into a container, and wanted to know exactly what they were looking for. It was obvious that John and Peter had no scientific knowledge at all. "We're just following instructions, mate." Scott asked if he could have access to the results of the tests. John gave a shrug and promised to follow it up when they got back to London. At the second marker, Scott continued to grumble. "Really? We're not going to find anything interesting in this fresh snow. We'd be better off drilling down and taking samples of water from beneath the ice." "Perhaps you should get one of your tech bro friends to fund an expedition of your own, Scott," suggested John. It was meant sarcastically, but Scott didn't notice and muttered, "Yeah, I might just do that." They spent more or less the whole day out on the ice, scooping snow into containers and marking them with the relevant GPS coordinates. Though they all suspected that the science they were contributing towards was minimal, they enjoyed their day on the ice. It was an elated, if somewhat weary band that arrived back at camp later that day. The pouches of chicken curry and beef stroganoff tasted better after a hard day's hiking, and so did the measures of whiskey that Peter doled out afterwards. "Cheers!" Jerry noticed that Nathan chose to sit next to Samantha. The two of them seemed to be getting on well. He imagined that Nathan was a similar age to her own kids. "Girls or boys?" he asked. "Pardon? Your kids, are they girls or boys?" He was only making polite conversation, but to his horror Samantha began to sob. Nathan put his arm around her. "Hey, what's wrong?" "I'm sorry," Jerry blustered. "I didn't mean anything. I was just thinking of my own kids and—" He tailed off. Samantha pulled herself together with some effort and held up her hand apologetically. "No, I'm sorry. I'm being an idiot." No, soothed Nathan. "Don't worry about it. I'm sure we're all a bit emotional after the day we've had." That wasn't, of course, true, but it calmed Samantha. "One boy and one girl," she said, 20 and 23. "I'm afraid I don't have a good relationship with them. I got divorced from their father when they were teenagers, and they chose to live with him and his new wife. We started off sharing custody, of course, but I'm just going to say it. He poisoned their minds and turned them against me. I was working hard, of course I was, but I always made time for them." She sounded a bit too defensive on this last point, but carried on. "And if I was a man running a business and providing for my family, well, let's just say that it would have been different." It's not too late, is it?" asked Nathan. "I'm afraid it is," she sniffed. "Their father has done too good a job on them." Jerry sympathised. He was probably jealous. He had his own experiences of exes bad-mouthing him. The difference was that he didn't really care. It was always him that had moved on after all. Apart from Nathan, it seemed that none of them were particularly comfortable witnessing Samantha's emotional sharing and were happy to change the subject. Jerry decided to play devil's advocate and asked Scott to make good on his promise of telling them a story around the campfire. John chipped in. "Yeah, come on, Scott. Entertain us." Scott was oblivious to the needling tone and settled himself down to educate his fellow travellers. "You all saw the ruins when we flew over Greenland? What if I was to tell you that there might be a more significant archaeological prize in this neighbourhood?" He paused for dramatic effect. "Yes, people, I'm talking about the lost civilization of Atlantis." Peter sniggered. "Come on, man. That's the plot of a Marvel movie." "Hang on," interjected Jerry. "Didn't I read somewhere that the Nazis were looking for Atlantis?" Scott looked shifty. Sure they were, but it was the Greeks who first started the ball rolling. There had been several suggested locations, including Tibet and Iceland, but there's a possibility it was further north. Some well-respected researchers that I'm in touch with think it might have been here, right beneath our feet. Peter laughed out loud. "So it was an underwater civilization, was it? I've heard that dolphins are very intelligent. Maybe they have their own underwater civilization too. Scott was indignant. It's very easy to mock what you don't understand, he retorted. Their cities may have been on the ice. Hang on, said Nathan. How long ago are we talking about here? Well, the Greeks put it at 6000 BC, but they were going on stories passed down, not on hard evidence. It could have been a lot earlier. After all, humans have been around for 2 million years. The Sumerians are currently accepted as the first known civilization, and that was 4,000 years ago, in what would be Iraq today. But if I'm right, the Atlanteans here in the north beat them to it, and what's more, they were far more advanced. If they were so advanced, spluttered Peter, how come they disappeared without trace? Well, that's the mystery, replied Scott. How did a sophisticated and in many ways superior race of people just disappear off the face of the earth? Ooh, probably one of those demons or monsters that murdered all the people on Peary Island, said Peter. We better watch out. Speaking of which, it's time to put the drone up for a last shuffle before we turn in. You will go ahead and get into your tents. John and I will tidy up in here. We've got another long day ahead of us tomorrow. Chapter 6. Before long, they were all bundled up in their sleeping bags, and Scott was snoring gently. Jerry thought about giving him a poke, but decided that, on the whole, he preferred to let sleeping dogs lie. He was surprised that a technical person like Scott would believe in that kind of pseudo-science, but he put it in the same harmless category as searching for the Loch Ness Monster. Later on in the night, he couldn't say exactly when, Jerry was disturbed by John as he came into the tent after his stint on watch. He tried to get back to sleep, but found it impossible. After what seemed like hours of trying not to toss and turn so as not to disturb his tent mates, he was further prevented from dozing off by an ever more urgent need to pee. He cursed quietly under his breath as he wriggled out of his sleeping bag and felt for his torch and his boots. Creeping gingerly out of the tent, he was reassured by the dim light emanating from the mess tent. Peter must still be on watch. It had been drilled into them that bathroom activities were to be conducted at least 50 metres from the camp, which seemed like a long way in the dark. It was a clear, motionless night, and there were more stars than Jerry had ever seen, dusted like icing powder across the sky. For the second time in as many days, Jerry was struck by a feeling of awe and of his own insignificance in the face of the vastness and timelessness of the universe. Judging that he had gone far enough, he stopped and fumbled with his zip, cursing the clumsy mittens. At last he was able to empty his bladder. Relief. As he did so, he leant his head back to take another look at the dome of the stars above him. Shit! He jumped as something on the periphery of his vision caught his eye. After a split second of fear, he pulled himself together enough to scan the snow in each direction. There wasn't anything to see, or was there? There was something different about the sky on the horizon. There was a distinct area that was blurred or misty somehow. He squinted, but still couldn't make any sense of it. After a few minutes, it seemed to melt into the horizon, and the whole sky was peppered with stars again. Feeling very uneasy, he scrambled to finish and zip himself up, throwing off his gloves in his haste to do so. He hurried back to the camp, glancing over his shoulder, nearly tumbling onto the ice several times, but there was nothing to see. Thank God. Peter appeared at the door of the mess tent as Jerry approached and looked out quizzically. Everything okay? Jerry threw a last look over his shoulder. I thought maybe... He stuttered, not knowing how to explain himself, and now that he was back in the safety of the camp, he began to doubt himself. It's fine. I just needed to answer a call of nature, so no worries. I'll just... He gestured towards the tent, where Scott and John were no doubt sleeping like babies. "Okay," said Peter, and wondered why Jerry didn't have his mittens on. Jerry didn't sleep well for the rest of the night and was relieved when John made moves to get up. Peter was already in the mess tent, preparing breakfast. The sky was clear blue again, no sign of anything untoward on the horizon or anywhere else. Jerry decided not to say anything. In the cold light of day, he was even more sure that he had imagined the whole thing, or else it had been clouds of mist. Strange though, because whilst it had been insubstantial, like fog, he had thought he had seen shapes moving within it. Chapter 7. The plan for the day was to place some monitoring equipment at specific pre-planned locations. If they wondered why they couldn't have killed two birds with one stone by placing them at the sites they were sampling yesterday, it was of course because it was all completely made up to keep them busy. After breakfast, John spread a map out on the table and pointed to another 4 crosses scribbled in red ink. "Anyone else want to be in charge of the compass today?" "Sure," Nathan replied. "I've done a fair amount of hiking. I know how to use a map." "Great," said John. "Let's go." He made sure that the satellite phone was safely stashed in his rucksack. The first location was reached in a couple of hours, and John grabbed a small circular gadget that looked like an oversized carbon monoxide monitor. He mounted it on a tripod, informing the group that it needed to be high enough that it wouldn't be buried if there should be snow that night, even though the forecast was for clear skies. Again, Scott queried what they were monitoring, and again their guides didn't have a clue. "We just leave them here, collect the buggers tomorrow, and leave the science to the boffins back at base." "And yes, Scott," John drawled sarcastically, "we will ask if the results can be forwarded on to you." Jerry glanced at Samantha and Nathan and could see that they were, like him, a bit miffed. Peter and John were making it too obvious. None of them, except for Scott it seemed, had really expected to be doing cutting-edge science, but they were paying a lot of money for this trip, and Peter and John were beginning to treat them like idiots. Still, Jerry thought, not everyone got to go to the North Pole, and it had to be said, he was going to be the centre of attention at many a dinner party when he got home. It was at this point that Samantha took out her cell phone to take some more selfies and realised that she hadn't properly looked at the ones she had taken the day before. Considering her profession, Samantha wasn't very good at taking photos, especially considering that her high-end cell phone was doing most of the work. Scott's head was cut off in this one, and in that one Nathan looked like he was grimacing in pain. Her selfies were good though. Clearly she had taken lots of those before, and had the same practiced smile in all of them. She passed her phone around the group, and each of them politely swiped through the photos. "You've got a smudge on this one," said Nathan, turning Samantha's phone towards her. "Can you see? Just there in the sky behind you. Let me see. Oh yes, maybe a drop of water or snow got on the lens." Jerry felt the hairs stand up on the back of his neck. Can I see?" Samantha looked at him quizzically. "Sure," and she passed the phone over. It was unmistakable. It was the same phenomenon that he had seen the night before. "I don't know what it is, but it isn't on the lens. I saw the same thing last night whilst I was out taking a piss. Let me see," insisted Scott. "It must be a cloud formation or something. It's in exactly the same place as it was when I saw it last night, and it looks to be about the same size and shape. That's a bit odd for a cloud, don't you think?" "And look," said Nathan, "there's something grainy about it, almost pixelated." They all looked at Jerry. "Why didn't you say anything about it last night?" said Samantha. Jerry was defensive. "It was the middle of the night, and by the time I got back to the tent, I couldn't see it anymore, so I thought I must have imagined it. Okay?" Peter came over to have a look. You'd be surprised at the optical illusions and strange weather phenomenon you can get out here. And look, it's not there now, is it? They scanned the horizon, and sure enough, all they could see in every direction was clear blue sky. They continued with their work for the rest of the day, but a sense of unease had settled on the group. That evening they were subdued. Jerry wasn't comfortable with silences, so he tried to get the conversation going in his tried and tested manner. John, Peter, you're military men, British Army. Did you see active service? Peter looked at John, who, with an almost imperceptible nod, gave him permission to reply. Operation Telek, the shit show that was the Iraq War. Until 2009, then we'd had enough. Jerry pressed further. So you've been retired for what, 14 years? Retired from the British Army. We did some private security and consultancy work after that. Code for mercenary, thought Jerry. Eventually we got fed up of being shot at. Must have been hard to know who the good guys were sometimes, said Jerry sympathetically. The good guys were the ones with the biggest wallets, Peter replied without a hint of irony. Nathan looked as if he were going to object, but Jerry cut him off. There was no need to antagonise, relying on them as they were to keep them all safe. Must have been hard on your families. I'm selfish enough not to want my own sons to sign up. Peter shrugged. Good for your sons. He sounded bitter. For some of us, the army is family. Don't get me wrong, I'm 100% respectful of your service. Peter rolled his eyes. Sure, he said sarcastically. Jerry continued, No, I mean it. I'm in awe of you guys. So how did you end up babysitting for pampered tourists like us? This time John replied, We served with Henry Tate, the guy behind Arctic exploration. He heard we were looking for something a bit less hazardous and offered us this. All this time, John had been somewhat unprofessionally topping up their mugs with whiskey, particularly Scott's. What exactly is it that you do? He asked as he poured another tot. All cutting-edge stuff, Scott replied expansively. Humans have become weak and unfit for survival. I intend to improve the odds with a combination of gene therapy and, where necessary, cybernetic enhancement. Whoa, said Nathan. That's a lot. Hang on, said Peter. I don't think I'm unfit for survival. Scott leaned forward. Fair enough. In fact, all of us have succeeded in our own way. But if we had the chance to be better, we'd take it, wouldn't we? What if we could take genetic material, superior genetic material, and splice it into our own genome? We would be smarter and stronger. We could achieve within our own lifespan more than generations of natural selection could. And if we add in cybernetic enhancements, then... He trailed off. You'd have a superior race of those who could afford it, said Jerry. Scott leaned back in his chair. What's new? Don't tell me that your children haven't had the best schools, the best food, the best medicine. Point taken, said Samantha. But you don't have any children, Scott. Who are you doing it for? For humanity, said Scott simply. Jerry didn't believe him for a minute. He was about to ask him exactly what the superior genetic material was, when they heard it again. Closer this time, an ear-splitting crack, followed by a drawn-out, blood-curdling screech. That wasn't a wolf, Scott screamed, panicking. John picked up his rifle and stormed out of the tent. There were snowflakes in the air, making for poor visibility, but John swept his torch across the snow anyway. Nothing. Peter had joined him by now and was checking out behind the camp. Still nothing. Inside, the others held their breath. The wind picked up and howled as it tugged at the tent. Was it just the wind, or was there something else? John came in, shaking off a dusting of snow. Without a word, He readied the drone and the laptop. By the time Peter came back in, the drone was in the air. He gazed intently at the screen. The others scanned his face, looking for any sign of reassurance. After what seemed like an age, he shook his head. "I can't see anything. Tell John to bring the drone in, would you?" Jerry nodded and went out. 10 minutes later, John hadn't come in. "Jerry, did you tell John to bring the drone down?" "Yeah, of course I did," he responded. Tutting frustratedly, Peter went to the flap of the tent and called out, "John, John, you can bring the drone down now." "I hear you," John called back, and a few minutes later he came back into the tent. "There's a problem. I've lost control of the drone. It hasn't come down." Peter returned to the laptop and saw that the screen was just static. Damn! He hit the replay button. At first the footage showed, as expected, an aerial view of the camp. Then came footage from beyond the camp as the drone circled out. Then it went dead. But just before it went dead, it sped off and shot off towards the horizon, almost as if it had been sucked into the night. Okay. John attempted to quell the rising panic setting into the group. "I think we're dealing with a freak weather condition." And for sure, as he spoke, they could all hear that the wind had strengthened. Samantha butted in. "I thought you said there wasn't going to be any snow tonight." "There wasn't supposed to be." He turned to Peter for confirmation. "That's right. We did long-range and short-range forecasts before we set out," said John. "Hand me the satellite phone. I'll check in with the office." He moved towards the back of the tent as he dialed. The answer machine kicked in. Of course, it was late. He looked at Peter. "Will I call Henry? I'm not sure that this is exactly an emergency." For the first time on the expedition, the military men were showing signs of uncertainty. Jerry stepped in. "Of course it's an emergency, and if I was your boss, I'd expect you to keep me in the loop." The men responded to the authority in his voice. Jerry might have been a lowly member of the pack in the expedition so far, but at home and in his business world, he was the alpha male. He knew how to give commands. But it went to answer machine again. Jerry stared in disbelief. "Is that the only emergency number you have?" "I've got the pilot's number. I'll try that." With relief, they heard the call being picked up. "Mike, it's John." "Yeah, John from Arctic Expedition. Sorry, I know it's late, but..." "No, Henry isn't available. Look, I just need you to check something out for me. We've been hit by some unexpected bad weather, and I just want to know if it's going to be a problem." "Yes, I know, we checked the forecast before we left, but what can I say?" "Okay, thanks, I'll hold." After a few tense minutes, John continued. Okay, but listen." He held the phone up towards the roof of the tent. "What's that then?" "I know, I don't understand it either." Okay. "Yeah. Sounds like a plan. Talk to you tomorrow." "Yep, thanks, Mike." John turned towards the group. "There's nothing on the weather apps to indicate this kind of weather." I know. He held out his hands placatingly. "It is what it is. The helicopter can't fly at night in this weather, so we're going to call Mike and Henry again in the morning and see how things are. If necessary, we'll cut the expedition short." Samantha spoke for all of them when she said that she thought that would be the best outcome. After all, it wasn't just the weather that was worrying them. After what had happened to the drone, on top of everything else, none of them wanted to go into their tents that night. They were too wired to sleep anyway. Chapter 8. The Ice Entity. We examined the small flying machine that we had captured. Encased in ice, it seemed to pose no threat. We came together to flex the ice cap. It splintered and cracked, forming a spider's web of deep black crevasses. We tested our strength emanating from the chasms in a swarm of crystals amid a tornado of swirling snow and ice. Then we sank back into the abyss. We weren't ready yet. Chapter 9. The storm raged all night. There were lots of times when they thought the tent would be ripped up and flung into the wind, with them inside it. It held fast though, God knows how. The fat flakes of snow that had fallen earlier in the night had turned into needles of ice. There was no point in anyone keeping watch. Visibility was too poor in any case. Peter and John kept their rifles loaded beside them, but it was a small comfort. Around 4 a.m, the lights went out. The generator had died. They were surprised it hadn't gone sooner. Nathan turned on his torch. "Save your batteries," said John. "It's not long till dawn." Chapter 10. By first light, the storm had abated a little, though the wind was still driving ice crystals like needles into the tent. It was possible to get outside to assess the damage. The snow was 3 feet deep around all sides of the mess tent. The smaller sleeping tents were flattened. John took a shovel and clambered through the snow to check out the generator. The air intake was iced over. He chipped at it with the shovel and attempted to restart it. Not even a splutter. Back inside, he gave them the bad news. "Well, that's it," said Peter. "Hand me the satellite phone. As soon as the chopper can get in the air, we're out of here." He punched the numbers. Frustratingly, it went to the answer machine. "Hi, Mike. Call me as soon as you can. We need you to evacuate us." "What the?" He looked at the satellite phone. It had gone dead. He flung it to the floor. "Hey," said Jerry, picking it up. Jerry tried to get it going, but it was no good. He shook it in annoyance. "He probably got the message, though, don't you think?" said Samantha hopefully. "Maybe," Peter replied. Nathan tried to cheer them up. "Sure he did. And when he tries to call back and can't get through, he'll come anyway." Scott whinged. "I knew I shouldn't have come. There's something wrong here." "That's enough," Jerry admonished. "You're not helping. We need to pull together to keep ourselves safe until the helicopter comes." He looked at Peter and John. "What do we need to do?" John replied, "We've got a small camping cooker here with a couple of gas cartridges. The first thing we should do is get a hot drink and some food inside us." Jerry asked if they should clear the snow off the tent, worried about the weight of it, but John said no. "The snow is an excellent insulator. We'll leave it on and bank some more up against the sides if we can, especially on the windward side." Chapter 11. The Ice Entity. The crevices are getting longer, each new jagged crack bringing us closer to the origin of the small machine. Now, when we rise into the storm, we can maintain form and purpose for a period of time. Since we emerged from hibernation, we have been absorbing small sea creatures, gathering strength. Now we have caught more substantial prey. 2 large, white organisms are hanging motionless under the water, encased in ice. One is still perfect, its luminous white smooth body glowing in the dim blue light. The other is dull and misshapen, its skin sunken as it begins to liquefy. Chapter 12. After they had done their best to insulate the tent, they huddled together inside their sleeping bags, wrapping themselves in all the clothes they could find. They kept one torch lit, just for the sake of their morale. The laptop had lost its charge long ago. They had plenty of pouches of food, and they could eat them cold if they had to. They had enough gas in the cartridges to melt snow for water. They wouldn't die of starvation or thirst for some time. The wind was still swirling around the tent, but it was muffled now by the snow. Every now and then, Jerry thought he heard the screech and the crack, but he kept it to himself. There was nothing to be done about it anyway. Chapter 13. Mike had received the message from the satellite phone. Peter had been unambiguous. He wanted them to be evacuated. He was surprised. John and Peter were tough nuts, and they had been well prepared. It was unlike them to overreact to a bit of weather. He looked out of the window. It looked okay. To cover his ass, he put a call in to Henry, who sounded more pissed off than worried. "No," said Mike. "They got cut off before they could say what the problem was." "No, I've tried calling them back." "Oh, well, it's your call, but—" Henry reluctantly agreed that Mike should go and get them, thinking all the while about how he could spin it, depending on the actual circumstances. When Mike took off, there were a few snow flurries in the air, but visibility was good, and it was not particularly windy. He had flown in worse. He had been planning to spend the day with his girlfriend, who worked at the local hotel. Damn, she didn't get many days off. This had better not be a false alarm. The flight was routine until he was about 4 miles out from the camp. Then, for sure, it was getting windier and colder. Ahead of him, he could make out what looked like a bank of fog, yet he was still flying in clear sky. He felt the first stirring of unease. The camp couldn't be too far away, so he decided to continue on as far as he could. He was nearly there. Chapter 14. Everyone was dealing with their fear in a different way. Samantha had gone very quiet. She was doing the equivalent of hiding behind a cushion during the scary bits of a film. Peter and John were sanguine. They'd been in tight spots before and got out of them every single time. Nathan was trying to apply logic to the situation, and Jerry's ego was such that he couldn't imagine that anything bad would ever happen to him. Scott was tightly wound. "This is bad. This is very bad. I'm telling you, there's something out there, and it's coming for us." Jerry snapped at him. "Will you shut up? You don't know there's anything out there, any more than I do." "But I do know." Scott was nearly screaming. "Himmler was right. About Atlantis, about the Holy Grail, about everything," he sobbed. "That's the proof, out there. I know it. Oh, God. Christ, if I have to come over there and shut you up, I will." Jerry tailed off as John held up a hand to him. "Quiet. I hear something." At first, all they could hear was the buffeting wind. But yes, faint at first, but becoming unmistakable, the sound of a helicopter. John was the first up and out of the tent, grabbing the flare from the emergency kit as he went. The rest of them scrambled out of their sleeping bags and weren't far behind. John made his way through the snow until he was far enough from the tents for the helicopter to land, ignited a flare and stuck it into the snow, then another. They burned incandescent red, sending plumes of thick smoke up into the wind. Mike was in the fog now. He'd never seen anything like it. It wasn't still and heavy like fog usually was. It was swirling and tiny hailstones were dinking off the cockpit. He didn't like it. He was about to abort the rescue attempt and head for home when he saw the glow from the flares. The visibility improved for a moment, and he saw the camp ahead of him and the bundled up figures outside it waving frantically. He couldn't turn back now that they'd seen him. He'd have to try and land. He dropped his altitude and approached the landing spot that John had identified for him. He hovered above the flares, but because the visibility was poor, he didn't see what was rearing up behind him. The people on the ground did, though. The needles of ice and swirling snow had coalesced into a gigantic, multifaceted figure. It couldn't be, and yet it was a creature made of ice crystals. The exact form was indistinct through the blizzard. It was as if it was part of the blizzard, but it was no freak weather phenomenon. It moved, pulsing and shape-shifting, with purpose, terrible purpose, and now it had limbs, or at least one limb, which stretched with an ear-splitting howl towards the helicopter. Jerry thought that the helicopter would be swiped out of the air, but instead at the touch, the arm or tentacle, it was hard to make out which, the helicopter, it was instantly encased in ice. It simply dropped out of the sky. John had been standing, transfixed by what he was seeing. It was only when he saw the rotor blades freezing that he came to his senses and began to run. But it was too late. The helicopter plunged into the ground. As it did so, the ice encasing it shattered and it exploded. As he ran, John looked over his shoulder and to his horror saw Mike, transfixed in the cockpit, eyes wide and staring. Mike had been dead before the helicopter hit the ground. John was dead a split second after. They watched helplessly, sure that it would be their turn next, but the creature withdrew into the mist. They scrambled back into the tent. He would not save them, they knew that. But what else could they do? They huddled together, teeth chattering from cold and shock. After a little while, Jerry's survival instinct kicked in. He wasn't dead yet. With each moment that passed, he hoped a little more that, whatever it was, it could have no interest in insignificant insects such as them. It might not have even meant to down the helicopter. If they could sit it out, maybe it would go back to where it came from, and surely when Mike didn't return there, would be a search party. He expressed his hope to the others. Samantha nodded tearfully. She wanted to believe him. But Scott wasn't listening. He had his head in his hands, moaning quietly. Peter wasn't listening either. He was in shock. He and John were a team, more than that really. They were a family. The only family either of them had ever had. He was less than half a man now that John was gone. Chapter 15. We had been perplexed by the explosion. We retreated, and we searched our hive mind. No, we had never seen a machine like this before. The small flying machine that we had acquired the day before had been tiny in comparison, and no explosion had accompanied its neutralization. It had, though, alerted us to the presence of something alien in our domain. That is why, having gained enough strength, we moved south to investigate. The last time we emerged from hibernation, there had been an infestation of bipedal creatures on the very edge of the landmass. We had seen them several times before. The bipeds had been very primitive the first time they had appeared, and not well adapted to the cold. But each time they returned, they had developed new tools and were able to encroach further onto the ice. Once they had become inexplicably powerful and had posed a great threat to us, we had been able to destroy them. But their kind was stubborn. They had appeared again, primitive once more, dressed in furs again, with only rudimentary weapons. We eliminated them again, and again. The flying machine, though, this was something new. And the energy it released when it hit the ice, was it a weapon? We needed to think. We would be cautious. We came together again to send the cracks in the ice even closer to the infestation. Chapter 16. Jerry took Nathan aside, making sure that the others couldn't hear their conversation. He didn't expect anything constructive from Samantha, and certainly not from Scott. Peter still seemed to be in shock. He prayed that he would come round soon. They might need him. Nathan, you're a scientist. What do you think is going on? Have you ever come across anything like this before? Nathan shook his head. I hate to say it, but seems to be more Scott's territory than mine. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But what exactly did we see? Jerry countered. How could it possibly be connected with the mumbo-jumbo that Scott has been spouting? Nathan replied thoughtfully. Science is about having a hypothesis and testing it. What we think of as accepted scientific fact is really just what best fits with the evidence we've got. When we get evidence that doesn't fit with our established theories, well then we need to change the theories. This is a life form that we haven't seen before. At least, he glanced over at Scott, in living memory. I suppose it's possible that it has been dormant, that it has a completely different life cycle to ours. There are some trees and fungi that can live for thousands of years. There's a fungus in America that could be 8,000 years old. Jerry looked sceptical. I know, but listen. It spreads underground for miles in every direction, and every bit of it has identical DNA. It could be understood as one organism, and look at complex systems like colonies of bees or termites. Who's to say where one individual ends and another begins? Nathan was getting carried away, so Jerry cut to the chase. Okay, I get it. But we can't know that it means to hurt us, though. Can we? Maybe I'm grasping at straws, but could it be that we just got in the way? That's possible, Nathan replied, but it doesn't make it any less dangerous. Just then, they heard cracking and splintering again, much nearer than it had been before, and this time they felt the ice move beneath them. Scott screamed, "It's coming back! Oh God, it's coming back! Do something!" He turned to Peter and shouted, "Do something!" Peter looked back at Scott blankly. "What exactly do you expect me to do?" The ice shifted again. Oh God, it's just outside. We have to run. We have to get out of here. Oh God! Run where? Peter actually laughed. Run where, Scott? Before anyone had time to think, Scott snatched the rifle that John had left behind and ran outside. Nathan grabbed Jerry's arm. "If you're right about it not meaning to hurt us, it won't help if we antagonise it by shooting at it." They followed Scott into the snow. They could see him a little way behind the camp and hear him shouting, though his words were carried away by the wind. He was wading through the snow, waving the rifle about aimlessly. There was no sign of the creature, but that might change if shots were fired. They followed in his footsteps as quickly as they could, calling for him to stop, to put the gun down. But he carried on. An ear-splitting crack rent the air, and to their horror, they saw a jagged black line appear in the ice. Jerry and Nathan stopped abruptly, looking helplessly on as the chasm splintered its way towards Scott. At the last moment, he saw it and turned, but it was too late. It seemed to happen in slow motion. The ice beneath Scott's feet tilted, and he began to slide, trying to run, but not making any progress. Then he was slipping backwards, arms flailing, trying to grasp onto something, anything, but only coming up with handfuls of snow. Then he was gone. After a moment of stunned silence, they realised that the camp would be next. They staggered back to the tent as fast as they could. "We have to move," Jerry shouted. Samantha started to ask why, but Nathan pulled her up. "No time, just move." Peter just looked blankly at them. Jerry grabbed his arm. "Come on, we've got to get out of here." But Peter just shrugged. "No point." Jerry gave up and joined Nathan and Samantha. Panicking and with no time to grab anything that might have helped them to survive, they stumbled out of the tent. "Don't look back," Jerry shouted as they pushed through the snow. "This way." He steered them east, hoping he was moving them away from the part of the chasm that was moving relentlessly towards the tents. Jerry's heart was pounding, partly from the exertion, but also from fear and dread. As they came up to the first of a bank of snow dunes, he saw that the others were struggling too. He could only hope that they had come far enough. With a last-ditch effort, he urged them to climb over the first dune and then hunkered down behind it. Part of Jerry, the most part, didn't want to see what was happening, but he had to. He pulled himself up to the top of the dune and peered over. Nathan joined him. They watched as the chasm splintered and cracked closer to the tent. Jerry hoped that Peter had come to his senses and that they would see him running across the snow to join them. There wasn't much time. "Come on, Peter," Jerry muttered through gritted teeth. "What's he doing?" A gunshot rang out and he had his answer. Peter had taken the easy way out. Perhaps it was the best way out, but he had drawn the monster's attention. The reverberation of the gunshot faded and another more foreboding sound took its place. The eerie screeching howl that they knew all too well. A glittering mist emanated from the crack as it drew near to the tent, coalescing as it rose into a gigantic figure. It loomed over the tent, pulsating as the ice crystals it was made of came together, then dispersed and came together again. Jerry thought he saw a face, distorted eyes, gaping maw, but it was only a figment of his terrified imagination, no more real than the shapes you see in clouds on a summer day. As they watched, part of it began to stretch towards the tent, shape-shifting like a swarm of glittering bees. It reached out and touched the tent, sending fronds of frost and ice crackling across it. Within a few seconds, the tent and then the whole camp was completely encased. The creature howled as it withdrew and condensed into a swirling ball of crystals. It began to pulsate, thrumming with energy. The ice cracked again, and the frozen detritus that was once the camp tumbled into the abyss. Chapter 17. The Ice Entity. We heard another explosion. Much smaller explosion than that of the large flying machine, but we needed to deal with it. We were getting stronger all the time. We had captured many sea creatures, enough to reproduce and grow our colony. We moved along the crevasses that were both weapon and protection. We approached cautiously. We didn't know if another flying machine would come, but all was quiet. Nothing was moving. We had time to study our enemy. On the outside, it wasn't all that different to the infestations we'd seen before. A crude shelter, though it was made of something other than fur and bones, and it was small. There can't have been many bipeds inside. We could take no chances, though. We immobilized it. We know that frail biped bodies cannot survive when the liquids inside them suddenly become crystalline. We neutralized them, and then we obliterated their hive. Chapter 18. Jerry and Nathan ducked back behind the dune. It would be their turn next. The three survivors huddled together, Nathan finding Samantha's hand and then Jerry's, holding tightly onto both of them. Waiting was the worst part. Samantha was reciting something under her breath, and when Jerry recognised the Lord's Prayer, he joined in. He didn't have a faith, but at this moment of extreme peril, he understood the need for it. They remained like that for what seemed like hours, but was probably no more than 20 minutes. The wind had dropped, and it was eerily silent. Jerry pulled his hand out of Samantha's and gestured to Nathan. Nathan understood, and they climbed to the top of the dune. All was still. Where the camp had been was a ragged hole in the ice, cracks radiating out from it in all directions. Where there had been a maelstrom, the ocean was calm. There was no sign of the monster. They slid back down to join Samantha. "It's gone," Jerry told her, and seeing the hope in her eyes, he said gently, "The camp has gone." Nathan hugged her tight as she began to cry. Jerry watched them. He had no tears to shed and no comfort to offer. He was surprised to find that in this moment, of all moments, he envied them. He wasn't used to that. They say that your life passes before your eyes as you're about to die. Jerry had always imagined that this would be a slideshow of his successes, but as he sat in the snow, a little apart from the others, he wondered what they really were. His first listing on the stock exchange? His first million? Which of his 3 marriages would he choose? He pictured himself walking down the aisle, each time with more cynicism. Trophy wives, all of them. He thought of his children, and at last he shed a tear, but not for them, for himself, because he knew that they wouldn't miss him at all. For all that Samantha thought that her children hated her, she clearly loved them, and they probably knew it deep down. They would mourn her. Nathan's family would mourn him too. He would have become a fine young man, Jerry was sure of it. He moved towards them and put his arms around them. He didn't know how long it would take them to succumb to the cold, but for perhaps the first time in his life, he needed the non-transactional comfort of a human connection. Chapter 19. The Ice Entity. This was a tiny infestation compared to the ones we have dealt with before, but surprisingly dangerous. It has been many of our seasons since we have felt threatened by such creatures. We are the apex predator here in our icy domain, but we are confined. The slightest rise in temperature would be fatal to us. We understand that we are at a great disadvantage because whilst we cannot enter the bipeds' world, it is clear from our past that they are able to enter ours. How many more of them might there be over the horizon? We eliminate them time after time, but they keep coming. It has been many seasons since our last golden age. We could travel far on the ice then, and we had no enemies. But warm air moved up from the south, and the ice cap receded, as it has continued to do so worryingly since we last awoke. New organisms moved north. There were several species of fur-covered creatures. Some were hunters and some were hunted. And there was one very different creature, much larger than the others, with a long shaggy pelt and two sharp bony protrusions at its head, evidently to protect itself. But none of them were a threat to us. In fact, we welcomed them as easy prey. Then the first bipeds arrived. They didn't have fur of their own. They wrapped themselves in the pelts of other creatures. They made crude shelters from the same pelts. They did not have sharp teeth or claws, so they hunted with sharpened sticks. We were alarmed to see them raising the temperature inside their habitats with tiny suns, but they were never big enough to melt even a small part of the ice, so we ignored them. We did not create their downfall. Cold and hunger saw to that. Then something happened. We don't know what it was, because we were still in hibernation, but a new breed of bipeds had established a colony on the ice. We stayed small and hidden for some time, observing them. It seemed impossible that they had developed so far during one season. They looked different. Each individual was bigger. They were not encased in fur anymore. They were sleek and metallic. At first we thought that they were a completely different species. They had a new source of energy, no longer relying on the uncertain capture of sea creatures and clumsy methods of processing them. We are much more efficient in that way, but they had something more. They had built habitats for themselves, using the new energy source to raise the temperature to suit their bodies. They had domes of ice, but not ice because it didn't melt, under which they grew things, like the small green plants that float in our ocean, but grown huge with many shapes and colours. We were unable to get close, but we could see that they had trapped crystalline structures inside the domes. They glowed an eerie blue like the luminescence we sometimes saw on our shores. We were scared because we were made of crystals. What if they could somehow trap us and force us to serve them? They had weapons too, not the primitive sticks and blades that previous bipeds had used to hunt. Those were lethal to the creatures they hunted and to each other, but passed harmlessly through us. They had harnessed the tiny suns. Heat and light streamed from metallic sticks, slicing through the skin and bone of their prey. This was a dangerous development. We would have to protect ourselves, but we had to wait. We had to become the biggest colony that we had ever been. Luckily, the season was bountiful. There was plenty of prey. We would need to ambush their colony, not giving them the chance to launch their weapons. We would need to act swiftly and decisively. Surreptitiously, we widened and extended the cracks in the ice that we had made to get close enough to observe them until they were surrounded on all sides. We whipped up a tornado to hide our progress, which had also served to keep them confined within. Not even a scout or guard creature braved the storm. We will always wage war on the invading bipeds. We can't stop them coming, and sometimes while we sleep, they make inroads into our domain. Now they have harnessed the power of the sun again. Then it was a pure beam of destruction. Now it is cruder and more violent, but just as dangerous. Maybe more so. We can only deal with each infestation as it arises. We have been lucky so far. but it is surely only a matter of time until we wake from hibernation to find the bipeds in full control. That will surely lead to our annihilation. Epilogue. Xanth Spaceport, Doralon. Jasper made his way through the thronging streets of Xanth towards the headquarters of the Zocon Corporation. It was a mild day. Fluffy white clouds were scudding across the blue sky. He was always struck, when he got home, at how like his own planet of Doralon the laboratory planet Terrata was. Of course, that was why it was chosen. The two planets were like peas in a pod. Well, almost. Doralon had 2 suns, whereas Terrata had 1. Roughly the same amount of radiation reached each, though, so they both had temperate zones as well as desert zones and frigid zones. Not only that, the compositions of the atmospheres were very alike, and so life had evolved in very similar ways. Doralon was, however, much older. When Terrata had been discovered, it contained only very primitive life. Going to Terrata was like going back in time. Zocon would have sent a driver to pick Jasper up, but he enjoyed the walk through the city. It was a hub for sentient species from many planets. Exotic scents emanated from the cafes and bars. There was always something going on. After a pleasant half hour, he arrived at the impressive sol glass and steel building that was the corporation headquarters. The camera at the entrance recognised his security clearance, and the door clicked open. He passed through a lobby containing artfully arranged glass specimen cases. He recognised several species from Terrata inside them. He made his way to the 20th floor, where Director Stallis was waiting for him. She motioned for him to sit down and poured 2 cups of spiced tea. "Welcome home." She sipped her tea. "It's a shame that you aren't bringing better news." Jasper sighed. "What can I say? The planet is looking as if it will be ungovernable. I can't keep authorising expeditions that make no progress. It's a long time now since anything useful was discovered there. Maybe it's time to concentrate on Sivistra and forget about Terrata altogether." "I understand, Director Stallis, but Sivistra is not as good a match, environmentally speaking, and it has other difficulties, as you know. I know that you have a soft spot for Terrata, but when I speak to the board, hard, cold economics will have to decide the matter." Jasper nodded. "Of course. But please remind them that our groundbreaking work on hybrid crystal biological compounds could not have taken place anywhere but Terrata's polar regions. We owe our very immortality to it." Yes, of course I will. That was a long time ago, though, before the humans appeared and complicated things." "I still think we took the right approach," Jasper remonstrated, "and we might still find another cohort of humans to act as our agents." "Come on now, Jasper. We still don't know what happened to the first lot." "That was strange," Jasper admitted. "We set them up. It was all going very nicely, and then, sometime between routine visits, they just disappeared." "Pity the rest of the humans didn't disappear too," said Director Stallis. "I know. I didn't mean that. I totally accept the Federation's stance on sentient beings. It was already stretching the rules, interfering in their evolution in the way that we did. The only way that we will ever be able to conduct new experiments on Terrata legally will be with the permission of its inhabitants. The dominant ones anyway. And I'm sorry, Jasper, but all of your clandestine efforts to find willing partners has been totally unsuccessful." "I haven't lost hope," interjected Jasper. "Admittedly, it looks chaotic at the moment. My main worry is that they will destroy the damn planet before we can take over management of it. As far as the Federation are concerned, if they want to destroy their planet, they can. None of our business. As I say, we will have to concentrate on Sivistri. It has a much more compliant population. Now take some time off and relax. I have work to do. The End. An original novella written by Florence Heffernan and read by me, Patrick Walsh. All recording and mixing also by myself.